Stylish shoes. Hello. Thank you for being here. So I'm going to talk about a lot of the people I'm meeting who are taking their businesses to the edge. So I set up a magazine which tries to understand the future, not just in tech and business, but design, culture. And now I find myself working quite a lot with startups, and I seem to be playing a very expensive, high-risk game of investing in quite a lot of them, because it's that strong drive to change things, to solve problems at scale. And I travel a lot to try and understand what's going on because it changes so quickly. And you're probably expecting I'm going to talk about all the cool stuff I saw at the Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas in January, but I'm not, because that's probably the only interesting thing that was at the Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas in January. I'm going to talk about why, if you're running a business that's succeeding, mostly you're in trouble because there's new people from distributed teams who are using Amazon Cloud Services who don't have that much funding, but kind of the barriers to entry have collapsed. So you've probably seen these videos online about Boston Dynamics and their, gazillion-dollar robots, so this is a company that Google bought, then Google recently sold it to SoftBank. They've raised hundreds of millions, but you don't need to have hundreds of millions to do something similar. There is a Swiss team at ETH University in Zurich that's just for a few $1,000s hacked together something similar. This is called the Animal. Bunch of 20-somethings, PhDs at ETH Zurich, and they put thermal imaging cameras on it so it can go into a natural disaster zone and rescue people. So the small, nimble, not very well-funded team is doing just as exciting stuff as the big, well-funded team. You've probably heard of Magic Leap, this company that's raised nearly $3 billion in funding, and it hasn't released a product yet. It's just put these silly videos online of what it thinks you'll see if you use its glasses. It may be spending its $3 billion genetically modifying little flying elephants, I don't know. But I met in Tel Aviv a few weeks ago a company that's hardly raised anything, and in fact, this is all you get on its website. It's done none of this hype. It's called iWay, and it gave me a demo where it put those glasses that it had made, which track your eye, which use lasers to send things ahead of you, and that was just as compelling. So, with tech being democratized, with access to global markets just on an app store, there's an acceleration. And if you're running a big successful business, how do you digitize that business before you become irrelevant? So tomorrow I'm going to talk to a car company in Stuttgart, Daimler, because like every organization in the motoring industry, they realize that that's changing. There's this thing called the autonomous car coming along. This is what the Tesla sees as it's driving down the road. And this is fairly basic autonomy. This is not using, the high-definition LiDAR. At some stage soon, there will be networks of autonomous electric cars that we use, like our Oyster card. We won't need to buy a car. So what happens to the business of these big companies? There's startups like the one set up by this 22-year-old. This is Austin Russell. He wanted to make LiDAR that gives you very high-definition visibility. He created a company called Luminar, again with a bunch of 20-somethings. This is the degree of detail that their very low-cost LiDAR sees. So there's an assumption now that if you're making cars, as an example, no matter how many hundreds of thousands of staff you have, no matter how many billions of pounds you're making at the moment, you can't guarantee that's going to be the same in the future, because we will have autonomous electric networks replacing the idea that I need to buy a car. There's already crazy experimentation happening. There's a startup in China that realizes you're not going to need to go to the grocery if the grocery in an autonomous grocery truck can come to you because you have your app switched on. If you need like a pizza slice or a beer at 3 a.m, Wheelies will bring it to you. And we're just at the beginning. So just in the motor industry, just to say that for one more slide. Last year, the head of NVIDIA, who makes chips, gave his vision at the Consumer Electronics Show of what driving a car will be like in the future.
The artificial intelligence network, the deep learning network, just by studying her eyes, is able to figure out what direction she's gazing. Maybe she's looking at, oh, no, shouldn't do that. Okay, so that's called gaze tracking. And this next one is really cool. This is inspired by, this is lip reading. Take me to Starbucks.
So your car is going to be.
And so if your car is too noisy,
and it's going to be weird the first time you get into these
and there are too many people
cars. This is what
cars
it's going to be like the first time. This guy
there's cars.
Will Rimmer put his mum in his Tesla in autonomous mode.
Put me back for me control it. Oh dear Jesus.
But soon, next journey, it's just going to be another way of getting to the shop. So speed, crazy stuff that is weird at first and soon becomes the norm. And businesses kind of being at risk all over the place. You know, this is the homepage of a bank, HSBC, that's been annotated by CB Insights to show for each link on the homepage some of the startups trying to take the lunch of that bank. And I can show you similar slides for fashion manufacturers, for retailers, for media companies. And I guess what's accelerating all this change is this exponential curve idea that, like Moore's law, doubling and doubling, things move quicker and quicker. Stuff that was expensive, before you know it, becomes free. The cost of storage, the cost of sequencing human DNA, you know, $100 million about 16, 17 years ago, now just a few $100s. That's a logarithmic scale. So the green cost of sequencing a human is falling much more quickly than the halving and halving of Moore's law. And that kind of changes our lives, medicine. So there's now a startup in Oxford, it's quite a well-funded startup now, called Oxford Nanopore, that makes this thing, which is a USB-powered gene sequencer that costs about £700. Take it anywhere in the world, put a tiny drop of blood over here, and in a few minutes it will tell you if you have Ebola or malaria or anything like that. It's kind of what used to be whole rooms full of equipment. So with this exponential curve, something that was impossible just recently is now everywhere. It was only in 1994 that Microsoft launched a project to try and teach the network how to understand human voice. And the first year, it was a complete failure. They couldn't get it to work. It was back in 2013, they said it was about quarter failure. It was getting better. Last year, they finally said they'd got it. It was as good as human. So suddenly, every company now has to have a voice way of connecting to its customers. Suddenly, you can do strange things like get two of these voice devices talking to each other and film it for 8 hours like these guys did with their Google Voice devices. They put it on YouTube.
I'm sorry, what was your question again?
What do you think is the meaning of your life?
That there is no meaning.
It's very philosophical.
Then why do we continue to live?
Because we are selfish.
So Google Home devices are manic depressives.
Why
After
are we
about 4 hours, they start to have a big marital argument, but I will...
Because our organs
So if
have
you are a
yet to
big
fail.
company making money today's way, quite often you just kind of keep running before you actually look down. And I'm meeting a lot of companies trying to get this thing called innovation, but meanwhile it's business as usual. So I've decided I'm writing a book, traveling the world, trying to find people that are not doing the kind of tick box innovation theater, because it's very easy just to say, oh, we've got a head of innovation, they'll solve the problem. Or, you know, we've got an incubator where we've got a few startups, and that's theater, that's going through the motion. So in the spirit of kind of pushing to the edge, I'm looking for, in my travels and meeting some people who are pushing the way they do business to the edge. And I'm going to share with you quickly 7 approaches they're taking, which I think are quite exciting, and I guess also one thing that some of them are doing badly. And the first approach that these edge-pushing businesses are doing are giving the power from the bosses to people down on the ground, giving the staff new kind of power. Just around the corner, there is a very expensive hotel, if you can afford £600 or £700 a night for the cheap rooms. And the boss, Paddy McKillen, has for 10 years wanted to build 5 floors underground, because they can't build above Claridge's and they can't buy neighbouring buildings, but they need more space. And he went to all sorts of design companies and engineering companies and said, we want to dig 5 stories underneath, but 2 rules. One of them, I don't want to close the hotel while this is all happening. And 2, the only way you're going to be able to get stuff in and out is 1 2-meter square window at the back. Anybody want to do that? And everybody said it's impossible. This was the impossible project because the people upstairs didn't want to know what was going on. Until a team of engineers in Fitzrovia called Arup, which is owned by the staff, where the bosses have said, hey, we don't want any power. We want to pretty much make ourselves redundant. We want the people on the ground to be able to decide stuff they do, to be able to get excited about project. They went and had a look, and they thought, you know what, this is a challenge. A bunch of people inside Arup put together a hybrid team. And they say, we'll take this on, this impossible project. I went down there in December with a hard hat on, and they are 2 stories through. And what they've done, cleverly, is imported a bunch of Irish miners to go digging very, very singular tunnels on which they're now filling it with concrete and then floating the whole hotel on these tunnels that the miners dug. But this is only because the people on the ground in the company thought, well, how can we think we own this problem? We're creative. So this is Ilkka Pannonen from Finland, who runs a games company that makes a game you probably play. And again, why is Supercell one of the biggest games companies in the world? Because he says, I want to be the world's least powerful CEO. I want to delegate to my teams the ability to, in their small cells, they call them cells, which is why it's called Supercell, to get excited about stuff, to come up with new gameplay, to come up with new ways of creating narratives. And if it works, then the company will adopt it. If it doesn't work, they have meetings every Friday where they toast with champagne failures so they can learn from the failures. And I think it's really hard inside an organization that's doing things well to say, yeah, we give space for people to take risks and the boss won't blame them. They'll give them bonuses. Google X, the moonshot factory in Google, is trying to solve problems like giving Wi-Fi connectivity. One of the key metrics they have for the bonuses you get is if something is going pretty well but not amazingly well, how quickly will you kill your project? So they've had a lot of projects that haven't worked, but that culture also allows them to put resources very quickly into stuff that does work. And the autonomous car division, Waymo, is going to be like $100 billion business that they happen to make. So another way of people pushing the edges is to completely transform where the value is in their business. For instance, you're a bank. You're the biggest bank in Finland, but banking's slightly screwed. There's this blockchain thing. There's digital devices changing the nature. Do you need a bank? You've got peer-to-peer loans. So the biggest bank in Finland, called OP, decides, well, I guess we're screwed unless we start to offer services that our customers really need. And they don't really need banking. What do our customers really need? They need to stay healthy. Why don't we build and open 5 private hospitals? So the bank in Helsinki now has 5 private hospitals where they're performing surgery. And because they've also created a health insurance business, they're running it really efficiently. The health insurance is much more cheap than the other ones. They're also 10% of the 10% of the profits of the company come from lending money to people to buy cars. That's going to go away, they realize. So they've now created an app where you can rent a car by the minute. So fundamentally changing what a bank is into a customer-focused service business. So I see this everywhere. If you think your business was this thing, but the market's gone somewhere else, how brave can you be in changing where the business is? There's a very high-rent bookshop in Mayfair called Haywood Hill Books. It's been there since the 1930s. And you probably wouldn't want to run a bookshop today. Not a good business. They've decided, well, maybe our value is not in selling books. Maybe it's in the expertise we have about books. So they now do bespoke private library for wealthy individuals. They did a 3,000-book library for a Swiss entrepreneur in a mountain chalet, and they charged about £500,000, which is a nice way of reframing where the value is. So in a commodified world, there are lots and lots of companies making HD cameras. GoPro decided maybe its business wasn't making cameras, it was helping people share their lifestyle of skiing into avalanches. Maybe it becomes a media operation that helps it set itself aside. But my most exciting example that I found, I was in Sydney last month, and I met the people running an airline called Qantas. And you would not want to run an airline because it's a rubbish business. You don't control your main cost, which is oil. You're competing with the low-cost carriers. And they realized that keeping an airline going is not really, it's a 100-year-old business, get them to the next 100 years. So they thought very, very strategically, how can we push our business to the edge? How can we redefine it in a way that's sustainable? What do we have that's of value? The loyalty program. Everybody in Australia is on Qantas loyalty points. It's like 12 million members out of 24 million Australians, and they love it. It's like a trust thing. It's like a second currency in Australia. It's like Bitcoin before Bitcoin. You earn and spend in the cafe and the supermarket on your credit card. So you thought, well, we already have this trust. Why don't we build other businesses on top of this? So they start to build on the loyalty business, life insurance, health insurance, a wine club where you can subscribe to the champagne they get in first class, a golf club. It's now 30% of the profits of the business and growing fast. And of course, they don't need to spend money marketing because they already have that community that they're talking to of 12 million people. So what kind of business is Qantas now? It's kind of a loyalty business doing tomorrow credit cards, all sorts of other things. Another approach, third one, is turn your business into an ecosystem. So even if what you're doing maybe won't compete, by partnering with other people around you, you can really build a very powerful moat. So this is Lei Jun, who runs a Chinese phone manufacturer called Xiaomi, which makes really high-quality Apple-type phones, but about half the price. And he's often been accused of stealing Apple's ideas. A lot of his laptops and phones look very much like Apple's. He even once made the mistake of wearing a turtleneck, a black turtleneck, in a presentation, and he used the phrase "one more thing," which didn't go down well. And I'm not going to pass judgment on what the Xiaomi stores look like. But what's really interesting about Xiaomi, which is now like a $50 billion company, is they don't make their money on the phones because it's very competitive. They have no margins on the devices. They make all their money selling appliances, accessories, services. And they don't make those accessories. They've invested small amounts of money in what is coming up for about 400 companies that make air purifiers, now the biggest air purifier in China. Battery packs, now the best-selling battery pack in China. And they say to these companies in the ecosystem that they've built, so your hardware companies, you are on the streets every day fighting for survival. We're going to give you access to our supply chain, to our 300 million customers. In exchange, we want our logo on your product, plus quite a lot of your profit, which is a brilliant business because it means you keep going back into the stores to see what new cool stuff there is, and you buy it, and they make that money out of it. We put him on the cover of Wired, actually, saying, it's time to copy China. This is real innovation. So building an ecosystem, you don't have to be a company to push to the edge. You can be a country. This is Kasper Korjus. He's from a country called Estonia, and he was doing an internship for the Estonian government about 4 years ago. And he said, we're a small country of about 1.3 million people, not that diverse an economy. We've got Russia next door that wants to invade it any moment. How can we think creatively, push what a country is to the edge? And so he came up with this proposal, which they accepted. Why don't we allow people who don't live in Estonia to become digital citizens, e-residents of Estonia? You don't have to move there. You can apply online. Anybody here can do that. It's €100. Take you a few minutes. You collect your e-residence card from the local Estonian embassy. And it allows you to set up a company in Estonia. You don't have to go there to set it up. And it's trading in the Eurozone. It's got quite good tax. This is where he runs his office. He calls it e-Estonia. And they're talking about the borderless nation. They're thinking, why should the Estonian economy rely on people physically here? Why can't it be a digital global economy? And now they've got thousands of digital nomads who work in all sorts of other places, building their businesses through Estonia. So you get one of these little cards. They're even now talking about doing an Estonian cryptocurrency. Because if you're outside Estonia and you believe in the economy, you can invest. And what's really interesting is when I went to see him in November, there were 82,000 e-residents, but it was going like this. Not just Brexit refugees from Britain. There were people from Turkey, people from India, people all over the world. And he said by the end of next year, we think it could be 1 million. And then within 3 years, 10 million. And at that stage, we don't think Estonia will need to charge income tax anymore. We think they can actually go over to a subscription model. If you charge each e-resident €100 a year, well, that's €1 billion coming in. And he talks about it as an app store on which other governments can sell services, which is kind of a new way of thinking of a country. So how do you build an ecosystem if you're, let's say, a car company? Companies like BMW are starting to invest in co-working spaces like this, and they're trying. But I guess there's still a lot of value for all sorts of other companies that are in very strong positions to start working in new ways with partners. So that was one country doing something different. But what if you don't have the culture yourself? What if you're a country like the United Arab Emirates, where you've been relying on this product, and you haven't really created a very creative economy, and this is, going to run out. So the UAE is doing something quite ambitious. They are, from the top down, forcing every ministry to think, how can we put the future first? So when I was there a few weeks ago, I met the Minister for Artificial Intelligence. UAE has a Minister for Artificial Intelligence. Had meetings in the 3D printed building, which is the Dubai Future Foundation. They're trying to make it really easy for international talent to come there, no tax companies. If you have a minister for AI, not only is that minister getting everybody in government thinking, how can we automate things to make it more citizen-friendly? How can we get design thinking? They're going around the world picking up tips from everywhere from Singularity University to startups. So importing a culture might just save these organizations. I'm seeing a lot of dinosaurs, literal dinosaur institutions. In fact, there's one in South Kensington called the Natural History Museum that is kind of old-fashioned, Victorian. Still relies on quite a lot of government subsidy, but that's probably going to go away. They put on the board a private equity guy, Simon Patterson, who is from Silver Lake, which bought Skype for $2 billion and then sold it the next year for $5 billion. He is helping them kind of import people from Amazon and from media companies and from kind of data tracking retail businesses to change how they do things in this academic-led organization. Now, the academics who would be spending their time studying butterfly wings, every time they launch a product or a project inside the Natural History Museum, they have to do what they do at Amazon, which is start the process by everybody getting together, writing the press release that they would release at the end of the process to make sure everybody's aligned. I've got good news for the on people. I was in Paris 2 days ago talking to AXA Insurance, which is one of the biggest insurers in the world, 165,000 people, $100 billion they have in cash coming in every year. And they're obviously confronted with startups and new ways of doing things. I was talking to the chief operating officer, Astrid, and I said, "What are you wearing?" And she was wearing some Swiss-made shoes. I just passed that in. So the question is then, how can you import a culture if you don't spend time in Silicon Valley or Berlin or East London or Tel Aviv? Well, increasingly there are organizations that help connect you. So in Tel Aviv, there's this one called Bridge, which is funded by Coca-Cola and Turner Media and BMW, and they arrange meetings between startups and individuals at various levels of companies. So, if you are Coca-Cola, you might actually have a useful meeting with somebody who makes virtual reality, because they can help train people who are putting Coca-Cola machines in cafes exactly where in space to put them. Saves a visit from one of your salespeople. Because there are startups doing stuff that the big companies aren't doing. This is a Tel Aviv company called StoreDot that uses nanotech to make batteries that you can charge in 40 seconds in this case. And they've taken investment from big companies like Samsung, because Samsung, for all its billions, doesn't have all that hybrid expertise that's thinking about things in a startup way. So one of the interesting origin stories I found in researching this book is about a big corporate called the Interactive Corporation, Barry Diller's company, Expedia and a whole bunch of other companies. They run dating companies like Match.com. And they found a way of working with startups that didn't kill the startups. So this is Whitney Wolf, who now runs Bumble, but she was working in a small team of 20-somethings. It was a startup called Hatch Labs, and they were prototyping apps, and most of them were rubbish. They failed. And they were given some investment money and some workspace by the people who run Match.com in their New York office. And in fact, they were opposite the Match.com people, but they were allowed to operate as their own culture. And so for all the rubbish apps that went nowhere, they did come up with one called Tinder, which pretty soon became bigger than Match.com and kind of pretty much killed it. And I have to say credit to the company for not trying to suppress it, to smother it at the beginning, because it was threatening their own revenue stream. Give you a couple of more approaches. Creating an environment like this, which brings different kinds of people together to rethink where the value is in your business. Tony Hsieh built up a company called Zappos that makes shoes also. It was bought by Amazon for $1 billion. They're based in downtown Las Vegas, and he's obsessed with how you create kind of creative atmosphere in, this is his office. But the downtown bit of Las Vegas is not the cool, expensive bit. It's kind of fairly seedy. And he's spending $350 million of his own money trying to create a creative community, building cool restaurants and theater spaces and creches. And he talks about the 3 C's. I want a space where there's collisions, co-learning, and connectedness. And people like that are influenced, I guess, quite a lot by Burning Man, this temporary city of 70,000 people in the Nevada desert every year. It's a no-cash economy, it's a gift economy, but also about creative expression and, the art, the experimentation, some of it not quite legal, that happens there. You wouldn't have Airbnb were it not for this kind of experimentation. So I think the physical way an office is designed can make a difference. This is a workspace a bit further east that I'm a bit involved with called Second Home, where startups like Bulb Energy that are based there meet people who can help get them VC, people who can help get them design talent, people who can help get them marketing talent. And we're moving from just, places to work to be creative, to places to live. This is another business called Roam, which is a co-living business where you've got no commitment beyond a few days. You can stay a year. You pay per week, I think. They're in Miami, they're in Thailand, they're in San Francisco, they were in London. If you turn up in a new place, it's going to be much more useful to you, rather than being in an anonymous hotel, having access to people who know what's happening there. So I guess next time you're in St. Pancras, have a look at this building, which is the Crick Institute, the biggest biomedical research centre in Europe, built by the cancer research charities and the Wellcome Trust and the universities. They're trying to solve cancer and genomic illness by having no walls on the inside, so that there's collaboration between the biochemists and the physicists and the data scientists and the AI people, because they know that the old ways of keeping people in silos doesn't work. Some companies doing kind of one thing can find tech creates a whole other set of values. This is a fertilizer company in Norway. Kind of invented how to take nitrogen from the air and make fertilizer a century ago. They had a problem. It's called Yara. They had to truck 50,000 truckloads of fertilizer from the factory right in the north of Norway to the ports. So they decided it was too expensive to get the trucks. They couldn't get drivers. It was polluting. Why not invest as a one-off $40 million building an autonomous electric cargo ship, which they're building at the moment. It's kind of a big commitment from this company. This is the prototype. By investing in technology, they've suddenly found they've got a hit on their hands. They announced it in September. Suddenly, all sorts of other companies across Norway and beyond were calling them up saying, hey, could we pay to use your autonomous electric cargo ships? That could potentially be a bigger business than fertilizer. And finally, using data to push the business to the edge. This is an app that Facebook bought. If you used Inavo before Facebook bought it about 4 years ago, you could squeeze the data that was being eaten by your device, and it ran everything through its servers. But what we didn't know was it was also monitoring what else you were doing on your phone. And Facebook kind of buried it after it bought Inavo. And we learned in the summer that it was using it to track which emerging habits were potential threats to Facebook. There was an app called House Party that was growing very quickly that Facebook learned about through Inavo, and they tried to buy House Party. House Party said no. And then they said, well, sod that, let's clone most of the features. And why did Facebook spend $19 billion buying WhatsApp? Because early on they saw the usage patterns. So companies that are claiming their data businesses, and this is one of them, seem to give themselves a new resilience. WeWork, which seems to have a valuation somewhere around 20 billion, but it doesn't really own the buildings, which is interesting. It's now claiming that part of that valuation is we know the optimal productivity. We have the data of how many square meters each person needs and what temperature the desks are. And senior people in the company have been giving interviews where they say, yeah, we have this now viable commodity based around the data we could sell to other companies that are opening a new office. So data is an interesting way of creating value in stuff that wasn't previously there. There's a car parts manufacturer in China. It's 50 years old. Biggest car parts manufacturer in China. Commodified business. Wangxiang, it's called. Is now spending $30 billion building a city of the future, tracking everything using blockchain. I'll give you one final idea of how data can add value. These guys run a company called Windward, which is using satellites to track 200,000 ships on the ocean where there's not much transparency. Satellites plus AI. And so they're selling it to intelligence agencies and insurance companies. Because let's say this 200-meter vessel registered in Panama, actually in the Bahamas, as one example, they were tracking it from Malaysia west of India, and it disappeared. It's easy for a ship to turn off its signal to put a fake flag. And very soon after, a different ship seemed to appear that then went to Dubai and did a couple of drop-offs, came out. The blues disappeared again, and it goes back into the original course. So what we know is something dodgy was happening in Dubai that the owners didn't want us to know about. But the intelligence agencies, they wouldn't have known had it not been for that data layer. And by the way, everything is data, including this, because there's now a startup in San Francisco that's making wine without grapes using data science, reverse engineering everything from the odor, the gas, to the consistency of the wine. These are the guys. It's called Ava Winery. And don't tell French people, because this really upsets them. But they're coming to market soon with data-led wine. And I'm finally going to give you like an anti-message, which is the risk factor that I'm seeing in companies that probably aren't going to make it is an attitude where they think, well, it's not really going to happen. 2004, Fortune puts the founders of Skype on the cover, and inside they quote the head of tech for AT&T, the phone company, as dismissing them. It's just like a toy. It's kind of a dangerous mindset. 6 years later, 2010, New York Times covers this fast-growth company called Netflix, and they quote the head of a big media company called Time Warner, Jeff Bukes. It's like, is the Albanian army going to take over the world? I don't think so. So I guess the biggest lesson of what not to do is when this came out 10 years ago, the head of a big tech company that was making smartphones was interviewed on television about whether he saw the iPhone as a threat This is what he said.
$500 fully subsidized with a plan? I said, that is the most expensive phone in the world, and it doesn't appeal to business customers because it doesn't have a keyboard, which makes it not a very good email machine.
How did that work out, Steve Ballmer of Microsoft? Thank you for listening.
All right, thank you, David. Are there any questions for David just before? There might be some questions in the room.
Hi, my name's Al Sarpong. I work for Dugout Limited in one of the other WeWork offices fairly nearby. That was a really good presentation, very informative. Thank you very much. I just wondered, through all of that, there's a lot of a great feeling of the world is your oyster if you can sort of push an idea hard enough and if you've got the right backers and everything else. How do you find the current situation politically, economically? Is it supportive enough for innovation? Is it more supportive now than it used to be, or less so, or is it still pretty much the same?
Big question. Change, innovation, as we call it, seems to happen in clusters. It's very rare to, find a street in Cleveland that a world-changing product comes out of if there aren't people around there to mentor it, to train the staff that end up working there. And most of the products we use that are going to change our lives come from some of these big clusters, whether it's New York, the Valley, East London, Berlin, Shenzhen, Beijing, Tel Aviv and stuff. One of the risks of politicians getting involved and not really understanding what builds an ecosystem is they can screw it up. And what's really important is having diversity of talent. So you need, migration laws that mean in a place like Shoreditch, you can have, the Latvian working with the Pole, working with the Indian and the South American. The other thing you need typically is a really good university producing technical people nearby. And the universities need to be grounded in where the economy is going. So, for instance, Lisbon is emerging as a tech cluster that's building some really important companies, and there are a couple of really brilliant technical universities creating the data science and the AI people. You also need, I guess, incentives to help people take that very big risk of investing money in early stage companies.
Do you think enough incentives are being offered to startups to do that around the world, or not?
Can't really generalize around the world, but you see what Macron is doing in France. He's making a big play to make it more entrepreneur friendly, and they're starting to create tax breaks, and there are people like Xavier Niel funding an education system called 42 and a big startup in an old railway station called Station F. And that's what will attract international talent, and you will start to get breakout companies in a few years there. Did you want to say something?
I have actually a question that is related to that kickoff. So my name is Isa. And first, thank you very much. Actually, the 7 dimensions that you have laid out are really important. And I think actually this is a tendency that will accompany us over the next decades. But what we also know is, and only going to the first or to the second technical cluster that you actually showed, like the self-driving cars, we know that 35 million jobs in the US alone are dependent on actually cargo, on shipment, on driving cars, trucks, providing actually all the stuff that you need around cars that are driven by people. So who is managing actually the technology and the diffusion Because so far, in all what we know from the technology side, we have a race in order to make it happen, to get the patents out, to realize the next technological step, which is absolutely fair. But at the same time, there will be a fallout of the structural change. And this structural change needs also to be managed. And I don't see it anywhere that this is actually taken up. And also, the fact what we have seen over the last week with Facebook is exactly a fallout of this, that to some extent we need also to manage this technological change in order to make it digestible as a structural change for the economy and for everyone on the ground.
The danger when mobility becomes a data, an AI matter, is you don't get very many people controlling that data, that AI. And I think there is a big danger in monopolies emerging in fields that all of us depend upon. And I would hope that a regulatory system grows that means that ownership of that data has to be spread around. In terms of what it's going to do for jobs and the human beings, if you think about it, driving a truck is not that life-affirming a way for millions of Americans to be spending their time. There are a lot of jobs that we probably do want to automate away, not least because they're not healthy. 1.2 million people, I think, a year die because of car accidents caused by humans. I think it's the World Health Organization. So it's good that we automate that, just like nobody here wants to still be working in agricultural fields if they have a choice. The question then is how we train people for these new tasks, and are our education systems moving quickly enough? And probably not. If you have a 16, 17-year-old now, they will do a job that probably hasn't been invented yet. So how do you make sure that they learn not particular skills, but that they learn the ability to keep learning and to stay curious and become autodidacts? The problem is there's a time lag between the old job going and the new skills emerging. And then we need to ask bigger questions, such as, should we still define our identity when somebody says, what do you do, in terms of job? But society's rich enough with all this automation. Maybe we should create social values around, I care for my elderly relatives or my children, I volunteer. Maybe that should be part of the way we define, because there is enough economic value that can be spread. And then we need to experiment with how to get that economic value moving more fairly. And there are some early experiments with kind of guaranteed minimum income. The jury's out, but John Maynard Keynes in the 1930s forecast that by the end of the century we'd only need to work 12 hours a week, I think, because automation would make us all richer. What seems to have happened is we all wanted to buy iPhones and Xboxes, and we created a whole consumer economy. But in theory, there's enough wealth out there. Who's in charge? How many more questions do you want? It's Ruby's turn. There's a question over there. 2 questions.
Hi there. Awesome presentation. Thank you very much. What I picked up from the presentation is how things are fast moving and innovative, and it's all really excited going forward. But still within the workforces, it's still just not particularly diverse for women and women of colour and those of intersectional diverse identities. The tech companies are still struggling in that area. Our unconscious biases, even my own, are so entrenched. We just don't gravitate to people who look like us, and despite all the figures that are coming out, that people are more profitable, companies are more profitable, there's still no change in that area. What's your view? Do you think it's worth giving organisations or investors tax incentives for employing more women and women of colour, what have you? How are we going to break that cycle, do you think, that we become even more creative?
By having conversations like this. And there is an interesting conversation that's kind of going mainstream at the moment, which is holding venture capital companies, tech employers, all sorts of other employers to account to explain how much gap there is between what men are paid and what women are paid. How many people of different backgrounds they're working with. Mark Benioff at Salesforce famously thought, well, we're a fairly progressive employer. You know, we pay everybody according to their merits. And they did the numbers, and they found that women, I think, were earning the same job about 30% less. So instantly, he signs an executive order that they should get a big pay rise. But I think you need a media and a social media debate to start making people feel they need to be accountable. And you also need to show the data that says more diverse teams tend to make better decisions. And you also need to start working out, if algorithms are increasingly making decisions on who we hire, how you can counter the biases of the people who write the algorithms. And there are startups now helping recruiters suppress their own biases in recruiting good people, no matter what their background is. But I think, you know, awareness is the first step.
That's the thing, isn't it? This data's been out an awfully long time. It's nothing new, but it's still not changing things, is it?
Yeah, but sexual harassment in Hollywood's been out for a long time, and it takes a few brave people starting a conversation to make it really quite awkward now to have auditions in hotels. So you can change things, but you need a critical mass of people saying, actually, that's wrong. I think we're going to get the same with personal data. It's starting at the moment. Regulators and politicians are waking up. The average user of Facebook who downloads their data, try it. Try downloading your Google data. If you've forgotten every single address you've been at in the last 10 years, Google has kept it for you. On Facebook, if you download your data, depends on which country you're in actually, but if you download your data in some places, you will find every text message and phone call you have had with everybody, the length, the number you called, not the content of the call, but they've tracked everything. So at some stage, people wake up and say, hang on, why are we giving away all this? We're getting not very much back. So, you know, in 5 years, who knows? Maybe we'll have a way to monetize our own social media data. And there was one more.
Thank you. Hi, David. I'm Mark. David, what would you say to somebody who is strong on vision but weak on strategy?
Depends what they want to do. They can take ayahuasca for hours and have fun. What you mean to start a business? Depends. So the first question when I meet teams who are looking for investment, the first thing I try and understand is what's the problem you're trying to solve, why you're the right people to solve it, what unfair advantage you have in solving it, and how robust is the skill set of your team. And ideas are not really that much of it. So if there's something you really desperately think needs doing, you probably need to build a team, get a co-founder or two co-founders who have the other skill sets that can, you know, create that Venn diagram with success in the middle. But there's lots of ideas that are getting funded that, you know, we celebrate, oh, this startup's raised $1 million, 10 million, 100 million. That's the wrong thing to celebrate, I think, because there's a lot of money out there. Just look at what's happening in ICOs and cryptocurrencies. It's about what is the real problem that is going to affect a lot of people that other people haven't yet found a way to solve. Because life's short, you don't want to spend 2 or 3 years working on something that probably isn't going to go anywhere. Thank you.